Diverting attention from the conflict in Syria, is Russia shifting the focus of the international spotlight away from a bloody civil war now in its fourth year? Hello, I'm Hanna, and this is Inside Syria. On this show, is Russia helping to buy Syrian President Bashar al-Assad time to gather strength? Intentionally or otherwise, Russia has pushed the crisis in Syria off the top of the international agenda by brokering a deal on Syria's chemical weapons and now through its actions in Ukraine. So why has Russia continued to back Syria throughout this crisis? Well, the two countries have deep political, historical and cultural ties. Russian arms exports to Syria were worth $1 billion in 2011 and have been crucial in propping up the army. Russia has provided important economic support. It wrote off roughly 70% of Syria's $13 billion debt to Moscow in 2005. And crucially, the Syrian port of Tartus serves as Russia's only outpost in the Mediterranean, saving the Russian Navy long journeys across the Black Sea. Before we get on into our discussion, let's get an idea of what's happening on the ground. The city of Aleppo has been under sustained aerial bombardment for months now. Airstrikes claimed more lives in recent days, while fighting on the ground is said to be at its fiercest in almost 2 years. Opposition fighters say they've killed 50 soldiers in the province of Hanna this week, claiming control of a checkpoint on the government's only supply route to Aleppo. And as the deadline draws closer for Syria to hand over its chemical weapons, there have been opposition claims that banned chemicals were used in at least 3 attacks since January. Al Jazeera cannot independently verify these pictures, said to show the aftermath of one of those attacks in the suburbs of Damascus. Well, there's a lot to discuss with our guests on this edition of Inside Syria. With me here is Mahjoob Zweiri, Professor of Modern and Contemporary History of the Middle East at Qatar University. Joining us from Moscow is Alexander Shumlin, head of the Moscow-based Center for the Analysis of Middle East Conflicts. And from Washington, D.C., we have Mark Kimmitt, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Alexander Shumlin. Is the idea of actually changing the regime in Syria now completely off the table? Are we looking at best at managing a political transition of some form?
Oh, it is the most complicated issue and question which could be asked currently because the Syrian crisis is pushed backward from the public opinion by the unleashed Ukrainian crisis. We can now hardly follow the details in Syrian crisis, but I suppose that all sides involved into the crisis, I mean the foreign actors, are trying currently to refrain from drastic steps and are awaiting something. I don't know exactly what, because the process of peacekeeping, let's call it so, in Syria is in a deadlock, is in an impasse, and nobody sees any outcome of the crisis, and what could be the steps to undertake. And now it looks like all sides are expecting the developments on the ground and the elections, the so-called elections.
Well, if I may just interrupt you there, apologies, Alexander Shumlin, but I want to go to Mahjoob Zweiri on that particular point. We heard there the possibility that everybody seems to be waiting for something. Do you see it like that?
I see, there is, we received to the point where basically none of the players is interested to do anything. They are waiting to see first of all, the outcome of the elections in Syria, not because they want to negotiate the situation, but they want to see the popularity of the regime. It seems to me they want to see how the regime can manage this. Having said all of that, let's not forget, there are three things actually had happened in the last few weeks, which basically made the crisis in Syria, at the end of the list of priorities. The first one is the crisis within GCC countries, because that one delayed any role which we expected to be played. The second one, the Ukrainian crisis, and the third one actually is within the United States, where basically there are different agendas in the region and in the world. And, you can look at the economic crisis and other issues. So basically, those three elements has complicated the matter and put the situation, put the crisis, in the list I would say the end of the list. And I think all of the discussion about waiting is not because there is something. It's just so it's a discussion within those countries. Something may appear, something may happen. Let's wait. Because basically none of the players is able to put something on the table. Geneva has failed, and no other solutions on the table.
Well, Mark Kimmitt, to your view, is this in a period of stasis? Are there no more ideas?
Well, I think that's probably the best way to put it. It certainly is not a case where there's a crisis ongoing, but there certainly is a sense of unwillingness. There's a mismatch between the ways, the means, and the ends in this entire strategy. The United States policy remains clear. Assad must leave. The government must be handed over to a legitimate, representative, secular organization. But at the same time, that outcome that is sought, those ends that are sought, are not backed up by the ways and means to achieve that. The United States is afraid to move off this thesis, at least until the chemical weapons are removed, which gives Assad a great reason to delay as much as possible. But the ongoing controversy between more military aid and the unwillingness of many within the United States to provide that military aid has led to that stasis. And unfortunately, I don't think we could call it a stasis. I think we should call it what it is, which is an ongoing humanitarian crisis of which all parties, in particular the Russians and the Syrians, should be held responsible for that.
Well, that issue of chemical weapons is something that, of course, is critical. A June the 30th deadline has been set for the destruction of Syria's arsenal of chemical weapons. So far, a little over half of the stockpile has been handed over. The chemicals will be transferred to ships with specialized facilities that are designed to render them safe for disposal. Sonia Gallego has been on board one of them in Spain.
Some 4,000 kilometers away from Syria, on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, lies the Cape Ray, a vessel that's about to play a crucial role in the destruction of Syria's deadliest chemical weapons. Currently stationed at Rota Naval Base in southwest Spain, it spent the last few months being equipped for this next mission. Cape Ray will be dealing with the decommissioning and neutralization of some 560 tons of chemical components from Syria.
Chemical materials that come out of Syria.
It's a monumental multilateral mission. The Syrian government aims to complete the handover of chemical components from its sites by the end of the month. Danish and Norwegian vessels will receive the materials at the port of Latakia. And when that happens, Cape Ray will head to the southern Italian port of Gioia Tauro, where the transfer of the stockpile will take place, ship to ship.
So we believe that they have all the tools that they need to hand to get on with the removal of the remaining chemicals. And at the same time, we need to stress that time is running out.
We'll basically come out of that reactor, come down through these mixers, back up through the pipe, and dumped right back in. So what you had to start with is hot water, recirculate.
And it's here where it will be handled with the utmost care. On this pressurized deck is where the mustard and sarin gas will be neutralized. Water in this hydrolysis system renders the chemicals into industrial waste, where it will be able to be processed in commercial plants. After the neutralization process, those who've been involved in those operations will then come here and begin their own decontamination process.
They'll be washed all over, head to toe. When the guy's done,
the whole process is expected to take place within 2 months in international waters of the Mediterranean Sea. And they're all banking on Syria to live up to its promise of delivering its stockpiles on time. Sonia Gallego, Al Jazeera, on board the Cape Ray in southern Spain.
Well, let's go to Alexander Shumlin. This whole issue of the chemical weapons, it came at a point, the agreement on it or the deal, came at a point where there was mounting pressure on Syria from the US and its allies in particular. Russia brokered that particular deal. Was that intentional? Do you think that there was an aspect of Russia trying to buy time for the government that it supports in Syria?
Yeah, I believe that all this undertaken is buying time for Russia and for Damascus to gain time and to be re-elected for the president, for the current president, Bashar al-Assad. But Russia is not interested in grave violations on the Syrian side with regard to the agenda and schedule of the chemical weapons removal. Russia is not interested in further complicating the Syrian affairs. So it seems it is likely to pressure the Assad government to fulfill its commitments with this regard. But what will happen, nobody can predict it.
Well, Mark Kimmitt, this idea that there was some intention from Russia, whether it was part of a long-term strategy to actually use the chemical weapons issue to buy time, do you think there's any validity to that kind of speculation?
Well, look, I think anybody that believes that Bashar al-Assad is going to give up his entire stockpile of chemical weapons, I've got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell them. I would expect that they will, in fact, turn over a substantial amount, but there's absolutely no reason and there's no incentive, quite frankly, for President Assad to hand over. So I would expect that he would maintain a residual stockpile in hiding to make sure that he has the defensive capabilities that he's asserted he's always needed against enemies in the area, read Israel.
Well, Mahjoob Zweiri, hearing what Mark Kimmitt said there, it does appear that the whole exercise has been, in a way, merely smoke and mirrors. Do you believe that?
You know, Michael, let's remember the whole issue of chemical weapons in Syria was a tool for two fronts. One, Bashar al-Assad, to show that he's positive towards international community. He's contributing to the peace. He's trying to show that he's cooperating with the international community. On the other hand, international community, it was an award presented to them by revelation in Syria, which basically they were not able to do it for years before the revolution. So both sides tried to benefit from that moment. Now, what's happening now? Of course, I agree with two guests now that the Syrian regime is trying to buy time. Of course, because this is the card in his hand to the regime to say, okay, I have something important. You have to keep me, to keep me on your plan. You cannot ignore my role in the region. So this is one fact. The other fact that let's not forget that the Syrian regime has faced in last, I would say, few months a lot of pressure because of the economic situation and because of the undermining, I would say, status presented by different candidates. This regime cannot survive without the support of Iran, cannot survive without the support of Russia, cannot survive without the support of Hezbollah. And all of these elements, if you look at the outcome of this, is undermining the legitimacy of the regime, the power of the regime, the presence of the regime. And the regime now saying, no, I have something in hand, it's the chemical weapons, and the world should take me seriously. And I think for all of these reasons, the regime will try not to, handle all of what he has, because basically this is something in hand important for future negotiation, future maybe exit strategy for the regime as well.
Well, it's now been 3 years, 150,000 people killed, and still the al-Assad government is in place. Alexander Shumlin, you mentioned a short while ago Ukraine. All of a sudden, the world's attention is on the Russians' activities in Crimea. And certainly, is there an element, do you believe, of strategy behind this as well, that once again Russia is intentionally pushing the issue of Syria off the international table? Do you believe there's any validity to that?
No, no, no. There is no intention. It is accidentally. It is coincidence of events. The two crises are absolutely separated. But what is to be stressed, in my eyes, it is the fact that the nature of both crises are the same. It is the revolt of the masses against the dictatorship, with the aim to overthrow the dictators, or let's call them presidents. This is the different kind of dictatorship, but it is the same in nature. So Russia and Putin was surprised by the scale of the Ukrainian crisis, and he was not prepared to handle it, to deal with it in political ways. So he preferred to be firm and to show his strength, and while losing the Ukrainian and the Ukraine as a country, he preferred to take a part of this country, I mean the Crimea, as a gift, as an award, and a kind of reconciliation with the Russian people, because the Russian people is really Russian people believe that Crimea is a part of the historic Russia. So it is absolutely a different story, but the approach to deal with Ukrainian crisis reflects the same ways, the same steps employed by Russia in its approach to the Syrian crisis. We can go into details, but I'm not sure there is enough time.
Well, let me go to Mark Kimmitt. I mean, this whole issue of the Ukraine, has it sucked away from energy in the West, in the US and its allies in particular, from dealing with Syria? Has there been an impact because of that crisis in the Ukraine on resolution of the ongoing issue in Syria?
Well, listen, if you start from the position that everybody in Washington, D.C. wakes up and reads the newspaper every morning, and the headlines are what drive to a great extent the actions of the day, yes, what has happened in the Ukraine has pulled a lot of the attention away from Syria, which is unfortunate because at the end of the day, you still have over 1 million refugees in Lebanon alone, hundreds of thousands of people that have been killed, yet we still have Russia and Iran backing the Assad regime. I would certainly hope that this administration understands the importance of Syria to our long-term strategy and is not completely focused like a group of 4-year-olds chasing a soccer ball rather than playing the entire field, that they ought to be able to do more than simply focus on one crisis at a time. I certainly know that the military authorities at Central Command haven't taken their eyes off of Syria, but I do believe, on your original point, that much of the attention that is going to Ukraine should be and was at one point focused on Syria.
Well, Mahjoob Zweiri, your view about that, a bunch of people chasing a soccer ball at any given time, is there a lack of diplomatic urgency because of the shift in attention?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, the focus on Ukrainian crisis has shifted the focus on Syria in the last 2 months. As you know, Russia has become more focused on what's happening there because of its national interest, because of geopolitics. Of course, EU and the United States have failed to benefit from that moment because Russia has been seen, delaying all solutions in Syria. Now, that's the moment where Russia is busy with its own business in Ukraine. The United States and EU have failed to benefit from that moment and try to put pressure on Russia, try to minimize its role and reduce its impact on the situation in Syria. So for that reason, I do believe that crisis in Ukraine will have its impact on what's happening in Syria. And Russia now sees itself as a superpower, has managed the crisis of Syria very well, and they delayed any kind of political solution. At the same time, they are gaining internally, Putin in particular, gaining internally and gaining in the region, Central Asia as well.
Well, Alexander Shumlin, that's a very interesting point. Is the fact that clearly, as you mentioned, within Russia itself, Putin has got great political support for his actions. He would appear to believe that he is in a much stronger position to deal with international issues, including that of Syria. Has what's happened in Ukraine lessened Russia's intention of making any form of concession on the issue of Syria at all?
Oh, I'm sure it's erroneous to believe that Putin is a war, actually that he is a master of the situation in Ukraine or anywhere else, in Syria included. Not at all. Now we can see that the situation in Ukraine and in Crimea also is deadlocked. And the pressure on the side of the Western countries, of the aligned West, is so strong that Russia is concerned what to do next. It is now inclined, in my eyes, to some compromises, and the statements of the leading persons in Moscow are more careful, and we can see it quite clearly. Even the people in the streets in Moscow or great cities in Russia are not so patient with the story over Crimea, and it seems to pass away because Russia and the average people here are facing some real sanctions, some hardships as a result of those moves in Crimea, in Ukraine. But nobody talks now about Syria. Syria is something distant.
If I may just go to Mark Kimmitt on that particular point. Mark Kimmitt, has the reverse perhaps happened, that pressure coming from events in the Ukraine has actually leading Russia to attempt to make some kind of concession in Syria? It's got a lot of its plate all of a sudden.
No, actually, I think there's a remarkable paradox between the two countries right now. Putin seems to be enhancing his reputation and his status within his country by being more active on the issues of foreign policy. Remarkably, President Obama is doing just the reverse. He's becoming more and more popular by taking a less activist, by doing less in the Middle East, taking a less active response towards Ukraine. And I think a lot has to do to the particular zeitgeist in the two countries. Russian people want to see and restore themselves to this position of world importance, while at the same time America is going through a period of retrenchment and isolationism where they want to see less foreign policy activism. They want to end the war in Iraq. They want to end the war in Afghanistan. They want to do less in Syria, why they were so happy with the Syrian chemical resolution. Sadly, as the old saying goes, when the Democrats get weak, when the democracies get weak, the demagogues get stronger. And I think America in the future is going to regret this very passive approach that's being taken by this president.
Well, at that particular point, we come to an end of this discussion. Thanks to my guests, Mahjoob Zweiri here in Doha, Alexander Shumlin in Moscow, and Mark Kimmitt in Washington, D.C. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive and continuing coverage of what's happening in Syria on air and online. I'm Hanna. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.